I went to church to cover a Christmas Eve service offered at 4 p.m. I got the invitation from a Jewish friend who refused to read the Christian version of Isaiah. I suppose on the idea that it would somehow tarnish him or his belief. So what could have been the barrier separating my friend from the church and Isaiah? I am pensive this holiday season. What I thought was a mediocre year, well, it turned out it did have some highlights and certainly some hope. Right now, it's the highlight of addressing the holiday season. The equinox changes to winter. It's cold or cool. The air is quieter, and perhaps we are more mellow inside ourselves. And now we have the time to reflect on who we are and what we are about to do with the life that has been handed to us. For some of us, we've had to face a pandemic, a birth, a death, and misfortune. To find solace and perhaps hope, we can look back on the historical themes that dominate this holiday season. The Jewish Maccabees holding on to their culture. The Buddhists celebrating the historical Buddha's decision and vow to sit under the Bodhi tree until he reached spiritual enlightenment. The Wiccan celebrate the solstice, the point in the year when the earth is most inclined away from the sun. It is the most southern or northern point, depending on the hemisphere, and a time to honor the winter-born king, symbolized by the rebirth of the sun. Zoroastrians honor the death of their prophet, Zarathustra, who founded one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. Kwanzaa, an annual celebration of African American culture that is based on African harvest festival traditions from various parts of Africa. And Christmas, celebrated as a festival of joy and gift-giving, and having its roots in hope and faith. If we take the time to read this famous passage from Isaiah, he clearly points in the direction of a new faith when he states that the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. He lived in the 8th century BCE, before the Common Era, about 700 years before Christ. His call to prophecy coincided with the beginnings of the westward expansion of the voracious and destructive Assyrian Empire, which threatened Israel and which Isaiah proclaimed to be a warning from God and a call to action. According to his account, he saw the need for a messenger to the people of Israel, and despite his own inadequacy, he offered himself for God's service. Here I am, send me. He was thus commissioned to give voice to what has been construed as a divine word, a prophecy. It was no light undertaking. He was to condemn his own people and eventually watch the nation crumble and perish. As he tells it, he was only too aware that coming with such a message, he would experience bitter opposition, willful disbelief, and ridicule. All this came to him in the form of a vision and ended as a sudden, firm, and lifelong resolve to reveal the truth as he saw it, and finally, his grisly death. I am fed up with roasting rams and the grease of fattened beasts, he wrote in a famous passage in the 1st chapter, rebuking the priests who hid the true spirit of the people in empty sacrifices and meaningless worship. He was also acquainted with authors of the prevailing misery, architects of the discriminatory laws, corrupt judges, greedy land grabbers, fancy women, thieving and carousing men of means, and irresponsible leaders, both civil and religious, and the rulers and princes, whose blind leadership culminated in years of greed and self-serving values over and above the needs of the public that was, for the most part, living in poverty and at the mercy of the ruling class, who used them for fodder for their armies and ambitious conquests, and taxes. Always taxes. In other words, he was intimately aware of the inequities and evils of human society, which may have been no worse than what we are experiencing in modern times today. Painfully sensitive to the rottenness of his society, Isaiah foresaw its ultimate collapse. If you use the thinking of the prophets, you might think that we're living in such a world of strife, epidemic, and perhaps even folly, and for what? The prophets of old were highly connected to the power structure. They knew that a divided community led to horrible consequences, a lesson throughout history. And from these prophets, perhaps we see the light of hope and faith. Are they different than the news gatherers and opinion writers and philosophers of our day, trying to sort out what is really happening and what ramifications these events and attitudes would have going forward, perhaps even to give us the slight scent of hope and faith in ourselves? St. Augustine wrote, "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger that things are the way they are, and courage to make them the way they ought to be." This, I believe, is the message of Christmas, looking at the light in the night and seeing a path to the truth and right living. The spirit of Christmas, a return to joy and the wholesome feeling of well-being, family, and some level of security, to be carried forth for a day, for some maybe 12 days. And then what? We gather as a congregation of worshipers, worshiping gods and icons of spirit, and perhaps an internal flame of devotion to our loved ones, and also perhaps the stranger among us, as Isaiah hoped for. And he said, "And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more." So as the Russians mass against the Ukrainians, as the Chinese teach the Persians to make war, as America fights with itself for the spirit of democracy and the betterment of its people, we stop and reflect on our voices and the power of individuality to create a world of peace, harmony, and goodness. Our history is replete with our failings, looking back at the wretchedness that allowed the messages of our sages to be birthed and then to die in a cloud of wars, power-mongering, and absolute selfishness. We gathered this holiday season to reflect on the state of the world and the state of man. It's been a challenging year in so many ways. Who we are, what is our responsibility to others and to the planet? Is it a new start we are looking for, a reboot and thrusting into newness, or is it a trip back when things wore a mantle of goodness and charm? Can we hang our hat on the myth of Santa, giving us the perfect gift only to be discarded or left in an attic? Can this be the true meaning of Christmas? Are the angels all about singing praises and also reminding us of our responsibilities to each other and to living in a godly world, a world that demands respect and favor to the deserving and to the righteous and to the charitable? Now is the time to walk in the wind and feel a holy presence in everything we see and do, to reckon with our evil and selfish impulses, to respect the power of creation that is the force that should inspire us each waking moment, and love of ourselves and others, the reason to be together this holiday season as a congregation. Isaiah advised, "Wash you, make you clean. Put away the evil of your doings before mine eyes. Cease to do evil. Learn to do well. Seek judgment. Relieve the oppressed. Judge the fatherless. And plead for the widow." Isaiah had it right. We had it wrong. He wasn't prophesizing the future in a vacuum. He was looking clearly at the present and had the guts to write it down so that it can serve as a basis for truth and inspiration for leadership. This is Arnie Pickholtz for the Savvy Channel. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.